You're listening to part one of a four-part class called Good News in the Neighborhood, taught by Pastor Dave Moreland. These classes are a part of the Vision for Life ministry that has two expressions: classes that people participate in real time, and a weekly podcast. Your input informs our weekly discussions. I'm Autumn, host of the podcast, and I'd love for you to join these conversations by sending your questions in to podcast@fellowshipdenver.org.
Well, guys, we'll go ahead and get started. It sure is good to see you this evening. I really do appreciate you and your willingness to be part of this class. This class is part of a ministry that we call Vision for Life. And Vision for Life is a ministry of Fellowship Denver in which essentially what Vision for Life is about equipping and teaching disciples of Jesus to be disciples in the world today. Kind of the assumption is that our culture is powerful and influential, and our assumption is that unless the church teaches and forms our people with the gospel on various issues, unless we do it, the culture is going to do it for us, and the culture ends up kind of having the final say on a lot of really important issues. And so the idea really is, we pick topics, we pick issues that are important, and then we just ask, what does Jesus have to say about this, and how does the gospel influence how we think about whatever topic on hand, and then we kind of hash it out. So these generally are 4-week classes, and they're lecture style / interactive. So this isn't a sermon, but it's designed really because it's an hour and 15 minutes. It's designed so that we can really get into some content, go deep, and have some good interaction and Q&A along the way. So that's really the hope for this is to grow us together as disciples on issues. So we've talked about politics, we've talked about sexuality, we've talked about racial reconciliation, various social justice issues, as well as things like studying the Bible and how do you deal with conflict, and then how do Christians grapple with mental health issues, with depression, anxiety, etc. So we try to talk about real things that people in Denver are talking about and are experiencing, and then the angle is, okay, what does Jesus have to say about this topic? So that's generally what Vision for Life is about. Now, from time to time, it's not about a kind of a hot topic that's sort of talked about among the city, but they are sometimes issues that we need to really grapple with in order to be faithful disciples of Jesus. And that's really what this Vision for Life, the direction we're going to go. As you know, since you've already signed up for this, we're going to, the topic is good news in the neighborhood. And what we're going to get into is, what does it look like to be a faithful and effective witness of Jesus in our community? What does it look like to represent and to be the salt of the earth, the light of the world that Jesus called us to be in this moment in time? What does it look like? What does it feel like for us in a post-COVID reality or at least almost post-COVID. We're getting there, thankfully. What does it look like for us to be effective and winsome representatives of Christ in our neighborhoods, in our homes, in our workplaces, in our city? What does it look like? So one of the things that's been so weird about the past year, and of course we can list out a litany of things that are weird and terrible about the past year, but one of the things that I've noticed, and I know others have as well, is whenever we as humans get in crisis, a fight flight sort of response is triggered in our brains, and we kind of can drift into survival mode. And when we get into survival mode, we you know what we do when we get in survival mode? We think about ourselves. We think about us. How do we stay safe? How do I protect me and mine, my people, my family? We tend to get pretty protective. It accentuates us them dynamics, and it actually flattens out our brain. We don't actually, when we're in crisis mode, in survival mode, we don't actually access our frontal cortex all that much. We don't access really our core values and what it is we actually believe deeply all that much. We tend to kind of devolve into pure survival instincts, and part of those survival instincts is not thinking about other people who we don't have to. That's just a part of our human nature. So we've kind of had a year really of this extended crisis in which many of us and our thinking has really been sort of flattened out. And so the question on the table for us now is, how do I begin to, as a disciple of Jesus, thank and care for and consider my neighbors, consider other people in my life, and do I care about whether or not they're connected to God, and how it goes with them and their relationship with God or not. So that's really kind of just setting up the stage for this class. I know some of you I know, some of you I don't know. But what I'd like to do just to begin with is I would like to hear from a number of you. And really the question is, why is this class interesting to you? What is it about this class that struck your made you interested enough to sign up? So I'd love just to hear if some of you wouldn't mind just blurting out why did you take this class? What is it about this class that interests you?
Hey Dave, Andy Fox here. Hello, church
Hey,
family.
Andy.
Nice to see all of y'all, and thank you so much for Fellowship Denver for putting this on. I will say that what interests me the most was that Fellowship Denver put this on. I'm just so thankful that you and the church are continuously reaching out to the city and to the community, and doing your best, doing the best that anyone can to ensure that we stay connected. So I do want to say that. I would like to just give a quick anecdote to your previous point, if I may, Dave, with a quick story. So I am happily married to an amazing person, and we have a 4-year-old puppy. He has four paws and a tail, and his name is Riggs, R-I-G-G-S. I know it's a kind of a unique name. And I will say that the name comes from my wife's alma mater. She went to Clemson University in South Carolina, And down in Clemson, college football is huge, much to Hunter's point of last weekend. And so the name Riggs, it was actually the founding football coach for that university. And so just to bring this back to your earlier point, Dave, a couple weeks ago, my wife and I were pulling in groceries from her car, and my dog Riggs was outside, and we saw that our neighbor was also outside with a new puppy. And we said, "Oh, great. It's so great that you have a new puppy. Awesome. What is its name?" And you'll never guess what our next door neighbor named their new puppy. They named it Riggs.
No way.
They named it the same exact name as ours. The logic was that they heard the name and they just liked it. And so now every time we hear them in their backyard calling their dog, our dog is now at the fence, like trying to get over and trying to be obedient. So anyway, just to your earlier point, Dave, I'm so thankful to be here for what you put on and why you, just understand as an ambassador of Christ, like, what does that matter? Like, what is our name as a Christian? What does our identity really, truly mean? And just super, super grateful to be here. Thank you.
Hey, thanks, Andy. Yeah, someone else. Why are you here?
I'll share.
Yeah.
Hi, everyone. I'm Allison. I just got to Denver on Tuesday. I lived here from 2015 to 2016 and have been trying to come back ever since. But, before I came here, I was in South Dakota with my family. And, my parents have been having a lot of health issues this year. And I felt honestly like, my cup was completely empty. Like I was just giving everything I had to my immediate family and I didn't have anything else. And I got here and I'm living in the Platt Park neighborhood. And, it's such a nice neighborhood. I came from DC where I didn't know any of my neighbors, and everyone here is like really welcoming and, asking if they can help, and people are like dropping by. So when I saw this series, I decided that I needed to be putting more out there than I'm taking in.
That's great, Allison. Thank you. Andrew, did I see your hand up?
Yeah, thanks. I am interested in learning more about how I can be a light effectively in my neighborhood and in Denver. I just moved here last summer. We're obviously still within pandemic mode, and we're, I guess, in the middle of cancel culture. So I'd like to not be canceled if I can, and be a helpful neighbor. So I want to learn more how to do that. So
Thanks, Andrew. Anyone else?
Yeah, I'll share. Yeah, it's funny. I actually have this notes section in my phone where I was like, what am I going to like really aspire to once I'm not giving my whole life to my job? And one of the big things was like building community around me. But I just don't feel like I have the tools to really know how to go about that. I moved from the Reunion neighborhood, which is up by the airport. And that was our first neighborhood we ever lived in as a married couple and having young kids. And it was such high turnover. People were moving in and out constantly, that it was hard to really build roots in the street we were on. So we just moved to the Central Park neighborhood the November before the pandemic started, and I was like ready to get boots on the ground, and then everyone just went inside. And so I actually pulled away from my job recently and have a lot more time to just really invest in more of this. So I'm just hungry to learn more.
No, thanks, Jennifer. Nathan, Kayla, I see that hand.
Hey, sorry our video is not on. We are tired parents in bed and we thought that was weird. So we moved in the middle of the pandemic to a different neighborhood, and we had some good friends in our old neighborhood. And when we moved here, like nobody came and introduced themselves, and that felt really odd, but also understandable in the middle of everything going on. And And then around Christmas time, I was like, well, I'm going to go hand deliver Christmas cards to people to try to introduce ourselves. And a couple of days later, our next door neighbor came by and brought us a pie. And she said, I'm so sorry I haven't come by. My husband and I are in the middle of a divorce after like 20 plus years. And it just kind of made me realize, like, one, we have this crazy thing happening globally, and yet people are still really like hurting in their personal lives with a lot of other things going on. And it was also a little bit of a good reality check for me to not be so judgy. But yeah, I feel like we need to know how to meet people where they're at, not only in our commonalities of struggling through COVID, but just with really real life things going on and the loneliness that this has added. So yeah, we're excited to be a part of this.
So glad you're a part of it. And what a reminder of the pain that so many of our neighbors are in right now. So thanks for that reminder, Kayla. All right, anyone else want to share? Why are you, what's interesting about this class?
Hi, I'm Bill Duca, and this is my wife, Deidre.
Hi.
Hey, Bill.
And we're not members of your church, but we've been watching on YouTube on Sundays. And we are interested in maybe joining your congregation sometime in person. And so we got interested in it by just exploring the website. And we saw this class, and we decided we wanted to take a closer look at it. So we signed up for it, and we're hoping that it will enrich us.
So glad you're a part of it, and nice to see you guys, and hope to see you guys in person soon.
Yeah, we look forward to that.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Well, good. Well, it's good just hearing where some of you guys are coming from, and I definitely think that what's in store will kind of address some of those things that and desires that you have that have driven you to be a part of this class. The first thing I want to do is just give a little framework for the rest of this class, and so you can know where today's content kind of fits. So today, what we're going to talk about is really the foundation, which is Jesus and his posture and his attitude towards those who weren't connected to God. So that's going to be today, is really trying to understand how did Jesus act, and what did he say to people who weren't connected to God? And then amazingly, we're going to be reminded that he calls his disciples, you and I actually, and summons us into this mission of engaging a lost world with the gospel. So Jesus explicitly calls us into that mission. That's today. Next Monday, we're going to look at the early church. One of the remarkable facets of the early church, the first 30, 40 years of the church, was its incredible inclusion and rapid spread. It transitioned from a mostly small Jewish sect into this incredibly dynamic multicultural movement that reached sort of the edges of the known world within 100 years. And so we're going to look at how did they do that, and our main guide with that will be the Apostle Paul. So what did evangelism and mission look like for the Apostle Paul? And so that's going to be next week. The third week, we're going to look at barriers, particular barriers that we face today in Denver Two, sharing our faith, barriers to mission and evangelism that we face. And we're just going to address what those barriers are and hopefully be able to provide some reasonable strategies to overcoming those barriers. So that's week 3. And then week 4 is all about the practical equipping. What are ways I can practically begin to be salt and light in my community? And we're going to have all kinds of different practical kind of equipping sort of opportunities and teaching segments that I'm really excited about. So that's week 4. So that's the big picture. Now let's get into to tonight, which is Jesus. Our core, like our heartbeat as a church, is to help people discover the original Jesus. So as it pertains to mission and evangelism, let's figure out, what did the original Jesus have to say about it? Now, the best place to start with this is the very end of Matthew 28. So hopefully you have a Bible, and we're going to be flipping throughout the Gospels tonight. But Matthew 28, the last chapter, this is the last thing that Jesus said to his disciples. He had already gone to the cross. He'd been risen from the dead. And now this is the final instructions that Jesus gave his disciples before ascending to the Father. So if you could think of if you knew that this was going to be the last time that you could speak to your children, or you could speak to your parents, or if you knew that that you had one final thing, one final sentence or paragraph you could communicate to your dearest loved person in your life, you would really what it is that you would say would mean a lot, both you from you as the person delivering it, and the people who are receiving that final message. So this is the last thing Jesus said to his disciples before ascending to the Father. So this is the final thing, and so it has this really incredible weight to it. And this is what Jesus said to his disciples. Now, the 11 disciples went to Galilee, to the mountain to which Jesus had directed them. And when they saw him, they worshiped him, but some doubted. And Jesus came to them, and he said to them, "All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I've commanded you. And behold, I am with you always, to the end of the age." Now, we could spend the entire time we have for the rest of this evening just unpacking what Jesus had to say here. But I just want to highlight one thing, and that is, he says, "Go, therefore, and make disciples of all nations." Now, I'd mentioned before that the ministry of Jesus was primarily to Israelites, primarily to Jewish people. There were some non-Jewish people that are integrated into the story that we can read about, but Jesus was primarily his ministry was confined to a small region and to a particular race of people. And yet the final thing Jesus says is two things: make disciples. So in the same way that Jesus had made disciples, he had called people to himself. Now he is transferring what it is he himself did now to his disciples. So I want you to make disciples of all the nations. And the word nations here is this great Greek word ethnoi, which just means people. It just means all the people, and in particular, not just Jewish people, but all people, all the nations. And so Jesus opens this up now to the entire world. And when Jesus said this, this is echoing God's original command to Abraham. Remember when God called Abraham, he says, Abraham, you are blessed. I'm calling you, your name will be great. You are blessed, and you are blessed to be a blessing to all the families of the world. So the original calling of Abraham was to be a unique, special family, a nation, but they were going to be blessed for the purpose of sharing that blessing to the entire world. Now here's Jesus, and he has died on the cross. He's paid the penalty for our sin. He has risen from the dead. He has victory and power over sin and death and the devil. And now Jesus says to his disciples, go into the whole world. In Jesus's ministry, he made it very clear that neighbors are anyone you encounter who are in need. So now Jesus is erasing any doubt as to who qualifies for hearing the gospel. He says, everyone. So Jesus's heart for the nations and his heart for people who are disconnected from God cannot be measured. He loves the lost. He loves those who are lost, and his ministry was dedicated towards seeking and finding those who are lost, and he now transfers that burden to his disciples and by extension to you and me, so that we too could share this burden of the lost. And so that's just a reminder of why we're doing this. Jesus himself has called us into this mission. He has called us to make disciples. And when he says make disciples, he refers to the entire process of making disciples, which means the initial process of just exposure to the Christian gospel and people who have no real exposure to God, to the point of interest in Christianity, to conversion, and to continued growth as disciples of Jesus. So making disciple is the entire process of what we would call evangelism and discipleship. Making disciples indicates the entire thing. So Jesus calls us, he calls us into that. Now, what does that actually look like? It's maybe easy for us to be inspired by the bigness of the call. Okay, Jesus, you've called us to be to make disciples. What does that actually look like and feel like, sort of on a day in, day out basis? Well, Jesus gave another indicator of what that kind of mission will feel like, and he knew that it would be difficult for us to be this kind of witness, and so in anticipation of the difficulty, Jesus has already prayed for us to be the kind of witness he's called us to be. So if you will, turn your Bible now to John 17. Now, John 17, so Matthew 28 is the last thing Jesus said to his disciples. John 17 is the final prayer that Jesus prays explicitly for his disciples. So this is what's called the high priestly prayer of Jesus. And in it, he is praying for his own disciples and the disciples who would come after us. So if you want to have a real explicit sort of passage where Jesus talks about, and he's thinking literally about you and me, about disciples who will be after these disciples he's talking to directly, it's John 17. So he's already thought about us, and he knows full well the kind of pressure that and the tension that we will face if we were to be witnesses. So I'm going to read this and just highlight a couple of places as I read it. Father, the hour has come. Glorify your Son, that your Son may glorify you. Since you have given him authority over all flesh, to give eternal life to all to whom you have given him. And this is eternal life, that they may know you, the only true God, and Jesus Christ, whom you have sent. I have glorified you on earth, having accomplished the work that you gave me to do. And now, Father, glorify me in your presence with the glory that I had with you before the world. I have manifested your name to the people whom you gave out of the world. Yours they were, and you gave them to me, and they have kept your word. Now they know everything that you have given me is from you. For I've given them the words you gave me, and they have received them, and they have come to know the truth that I've come from you, and they have believed that you have sent me. And I am praying for them. I'm not praying for the world, but for those whom you have given me, for they are yours. All right, so here's Jesus. He's praying to the Father, and he's saying, and he's thanking the Father. He's thanking the Father for his disciples. Let's continue. Verse 10. All mine are yours, and yours are mine. I am glorified in them. I am no longer in the world, but they are in the world. I am coming to you, Holy Father. Keep them in your name, which you have given me, that they may be one, even as we are one. While I was with them, I kept them in your name, which you have given me. I have guarded them, and not one of them has been lost, except the son of destruction, that the scriptures might be fulfilled. But now I am coming to you. These things I speak in the world, that they may have my joy fulfilled in themselves. Okay, here we go. Now Jesus, he's anticipating his impending death. And he's saying, Father, I'm coming home to you. But my disciples, they're staying put. So here we go. Verse 14. I have given them your word, and the world has hated them because they are not of the world, just as I am not of the world. Verse 15. I do not ask that you take them out of the world, but that you keep them from the evil one. They are not of the world, just as I am not of the world. Sanctify them in the truth. Your word is truth. As you have sent me into the world, so I have sent them into the world. All right, I'll pause here. I just want to highlight a couple aspects of this prayer. First of all, it is clear that Jesus' intention for his disciples is that he expects us, you and me, to do life in the world. And when Jesus mentions and talks about the world here, he is actually referring to the rough edges of sinful humanity. The term world can be used a couple of different ways. But in John, it's clear Jesus uses the term world to refer explicitly to the brokenness of humanity. So Jesus sends his disciples explicitly to do life in the brokenness of humanity, in the muck of the world. And he says explicitly, Father, do not send them out of the world, meaning I'm not asking you to relieve the pressure that obviously being in the brokenness of the world is going to cause. No, I'm actually going to send them into the world. And yet, I do not ask that you take them out of the world, but that you keep them from the evil one. Verse 17, sanctify them in truth. Your word is truth. So Jesus sends us out into the world. He wants us to muck it up, as it were, and yet to do so in a way that was sanctified, to do so in the way that represents the stark reality of who God is and his truth. So what Jesus is describing is what some might call the classic missionary tension, meaning we're called as representatives of Jesus to be in the muck of the world, and yet he equally calls us to be unique and distinct in our words, and our beliefs and our behavior amongst in those in the world. So this is the dynamic of salt and light. Salt is useful only when it's rubbed into decaying flesh, and when it's rubbed into decaying meat, it's a preservative. So the value of salt is actually only experienced in the ancient world. It's only really experienced whenever it's in close, intimate contact with decaying flesh. And Jesus says, I see you as my disciples as having a similar effect in the world. You're a preservative effect, and it's only beneficial when you're rubbed into the decaying world. Quite an image. Same with light. Light is especially useful whenever it's most dark. And so Jesus calls us into a decaying world, and he calls us into a dark world. And his expectation for you and me is that we be a preservative effect and that we provide light in the midst of darkness. So that's the missionary tension. A couple of years ago, Renee, over the years, we've befriended all of our neighbors and much of our neighborhood. And a couple of years ago, Renee was invited to a birthday party of a lady in our community, and she's not a Christian, never been to church. Her husband actually ended up coming to Fellowship Denver the first time ever going to any church. And that Sunday, Hunter preached on the circumcision of the heart, and my friend never came back. It was a poorly timed sermon, but he just couldn't get over it. He's like, what are you guys talking about? Anyway, that's beside the point. But he, anyway, so his wife invited Renee to a birthday party, and Renee's like, okay, I'm gonna go to this birthday party, and we've been praying for them for years. So Renee went, and it's a crazy group of people, big party group of people, but we're called to be salt and light in the world. And so she was in the world. And there was a knock on the door about an hour into the birthday party, and it was a police officer. And the police officer said, came in and said, I'm sorry, we've heard there's been several phone calls of you guys are being too rowdy. In fact, I got a phone call that there's a very naughty girl in here. And it turned out that police officer was not a police officer at all, but a paid stripper. And so I get a phone call from our friends, from Renee, who is in our friend's guest bedroom. And it's this panic phone call. And she's like, Dave, what do I do? If I leave now, that maybe this sort of severs, our relationship with our friends. If I stay, does it validify what's going on? And am I saying that this is okay? Because it's not okay. It's not okay for this guy. It's not okay for these girls. Now, that right there, that situation is what I want to highlight, is that's simply the kind of situation that if we're following Jesus, we ought to be in. Jesus knows he's called us into the world and all of its brokenness, and yet he's also called us to be light and salt in that world. So if we're not in the world, then we don't have effective witness. But if we're in the world and if we're not salt and light, then we're compromised, and the power of the gospel loses its edge and its transformation potential because you haven't been sanctified by the truth. So anyway, I just want to highlight all of that to say that's part of what it means to receive God's call. And it's really this, I think, pretty exciting call to be summoned into mission, to be salt and light. Let me pause here and see if you guys have any thoughts or questions about anything that I've said so far. And then I have some more good stuff for us. So thoughts, questions, comments. Maybe you guys want to know what Renee did. So I may or may not tell you. We'll find out. But yeah, thoughts or questions?
Hey, Dave, I have a question I put in the chat just a few minutes ago. And that is, you had mentioned kind of the muck of the world, which is, it's totally existent. But what language can we use to humanize the individuals who are living in really tough situations? I mean, I personally don't want to dehumanize them. They are, they're brothers and sisters that happen to be living constantly and consistently in really tough situations. But I wouldn't want to go to them and say that, hey, you live in a muck right now, and I wouldn't want to use a lot of language that I feel like is kind of being prevalent at church at the moment and in general. Just stereotypes of people that live in poverty. It's a tricky issue. Just curious about how you would categorize individuals that are living in tough situations. And thanks again.
Yeah, great question. The language Jesus uses is, I think, pretty interesting. He actually, a title that was given to him, and it was meant to be an offensive title, and yet Jesus accepted it. And that is that he was a friend of sinners. And the language of friendship, I think, is pretty powerful. The term sinner, of course, was a religious term to indicate a group of people who, for many different reasons, decided to live outside of the ethical norms of Judaism of the day. But Jesus was perfectly willing to call them friends and to associate with them. Now, at the same time, and this is some tension I feel, but especially with people who are far from God, disconnected from God, Jesus is quite okay calling them lost. He's quite okay using language that maybe would sound pejorative, like, "Hey, you're sick. I'm the physician. I'm going to make you well." When they may not feel sick, they may feel just perfectly fine, or they may feel like they're not lost at all. But by virtue of them not being connected to God, Jesus says, "No, you are lost." So, in terms of the language we use, I think it is important, and yet I do think it is important, I think, to maintain a burden for people who aren't connected with God, but not calling them, and maintaining the reality that they are in fact lost, and even though that might be offensive. Now, and Andy, I don't know if I'm quite getting to the heart of your question, but that's what your question made me think of.
Yeah, 10,000%. Yes, absolutely. I think that you hit supplanted Christ's word found in the Bible with exactly what you're saying. And it's a very hard tension, and also just deepens my thankfulness to have leadership at FDC who are thinking about these hard things. And I'm confident that you've talked about these hard things with many people. And so it absolutely meets everything that I was hoping for. And just thank you so much for that very thoughtful answer.
Yeah, you bet. Cool. Any other questions or clarifications?
I won't be able to word this very well, but I have been impressed that the Pope has gone with criticism, but has gone to Iraq and talked to people that you shouldn't talk to these leaders because they're bad. And then went to the heart of where churches were destroyed and had a service. So I liked the way he seemed to keep the dignity and the love of Christ, and didn't care, was able to speak to the criticism and do it anyway. So it seems like that's sort of an example of what we're called to do.
Absolutely. I've been really moved by that activity in Iraq as well. I think it's really powerful. Him touring where ISIS held various towns captive, and I think there's some pretty powerful testimony there. But it does go to show that there is real, whenever you take a risk and try to shine the light of Jesus in dark areas, there is resonance with that. The fact that people are paying attention at all, I think, and are moved by it, I think does show the power of whenever you are light and salt, people do tend to take notice. It just doesn't happen every day, of course.
I am curious about the Renee story. I typed this in the chat, so you can just disregard it now. But I'm curious, one, what your advice was to her, and two, how she responded to the group and what she did. So I've definitely found myself in those situations, not that particular situation, but similar. So yeah, I'm curious.
Yeah. So with that particular situation, she actually stayed in that guest bedroom until the stripper left. And ironically enough, there were two other members of Fellowship Denver at that party who ended up in that same guest bedroom. So the three Christians were that decided to stay. They kind of huddled out until the police officer left. So that's what they did in the moment. I would say in that moment, we, it's a split decision, and so that's what we did. If the roles were reversed, and if I were at my friend's party and he had invited a stripper to his party unexpectedly, I think without question I would have left in that situation. And I don't know why at the time it felt okay for Renee to be there in a separate room, but for me, if the roles were reversed, I think it would be really obvious and clear that I would need to leave immediately. So it's complicated, but we are our purity and our own integrity is a critical aspect of our witness. So anyway, but that's what we did, and we've kind of processed it. Sort of, if this happened in other situations, what would we do? But yeah.
So then I guess I'm curious too, was it something that the neighbor commented on? Was it just kind of like they just left it, or how did she follow up? How did she talk about it and say, this is really just goes against what I believe?
Honestly, they for our friends, it was just they thought it was just hilarious.
Okay.
They thought my friend, he's the one who ordered a stripper for his wife for the party. I mean, he just thought the whole thing was hilarious. So there's just a totally different sort of framework that they're working from. So there was no real category. And to be totally honest with you, they started sort of became interested, and afterwards became interested in Christianity, and but then something happened about a year after that where they had a hard shift back towards secularism, and then they kind of just withdrew their friendship from us. So but that's kind of how that played out. Unfortunately, I thought for sure he was going to become a Christian. He was a part of a men's group, and I was doing some of the making disciples, making disciple work with him. But then, for reasons that we'll talk about actually here in a little bit, there was a line in the sand, and he was unwilling to submit himself to Jesus, and then they just kind of retreated back to kind of secularism. So yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah. All right. I want you to do something for me right now. There is some value of thinking about evangelism and mission at a theoretical level, which we'll do, and at a theological level, which of course we're going to do. But I think the best way to have this discussion is to have particular people in mind. So if you could do something for me, I'm going to give you a couple of minutes. And what I want you to do is to get a piece of paper and a pencil. And I want you to ask God, who right now in my life do I need to be salt and light to? Maybe this is a family member, maybe neighbors, maybe coworkers. But what I want you to do right now is to ask God to give you 5 names. Maybe you come up with 5, maybe you don't. But what I want you to do, I'm just going to challenge you to ask God to give you 5 names. And so I'm going to give you, I'll give you 3 minutes to write down 5 names. And then after we do that, I'm going to have a little project for us. So write down 5 names right now. I'll give you 3 minutes. And then after 3 minutes, I'm going to pop back on. Okay. Now, hopefully you have 5 names, or at least a couple. One of the things we can learn from Jesus is that he had to pray to the Father for us as disciples so that we can be faithful witnesses of his. So it stands to reason that when we are thinking about how do we be faithful, effective witnesses to our neighbors and to people in our life, we should probably talk to God about them. For whatever reason, we tend to, maybe this is just me, but I tend to talk to people about God more than I do talk to God about people. And the power of those relationships, I think, sometimes show that lack of prayer. The primary lesson we can learn from Jesus, and this is key, is that the act and the doing of mission is spiritual work. So anytime you bring up Jesus, anytime you begin to do salt and light work in someone's life, you're entering into a spiritual battle. You're entering into real spiritual dynamics where there's resistance on multiple levels. And so what is necessary is that there are real spiritual resources available to you, which means that we need to spend time with God, talking with God, and bringing to God the plight of people who are far from him. So these 5 people that you've written down, I want you, beginning tonight, when we're done here, I want you to begin to, on a daily basis, maybe every evening, maybe every morning, to spend time with God, praying for and on behalf of these people. So any talk about evangelism and mission, we first have to talk to God, ask for his resources. This is his mission, his power, the opportunities that only he can provide. And so that's mission critical. So that's number one. We have to talk to God about people. All right. Now, I have 15 minutes left. And what I'm going to give you in 15 minutes are 7 principles, 7 aspects of evangelism that we actually learn directly from Jesus. These are 7 principles that when you study the life of Jesus, we see him demonstrate in pretty profound ways. So as you're praying for these people, now we can begin also to learn what might it look like if we're emulating ourselves after Jesus? What might it look like for us to begin to do some of this? So here's number 1. So we're going to talk about evangelism, a Jesus style evangelism. Here we go. Number 1 is this. And this is, you have to abide with Christ. Now, I'm going to give you this passage of scripture. I'd love for you to examine it later. It's John 15. In John 15, this is Jesus's famous teaching about abiding. So abide in me and I in you. And the word abide that Jesus uses several times is this word of remain. And it's simply a word for fellowship. And the idea goes like this, that if we have the presence of Jesus abiding in us. So if we're in fellowship with Jesus, and as Christians, we get to have like the very presence of Jesus in us through his Spirit, then the abiding of Jesus, a couple things happen there. First of all, we have the relational joy of his presence with us. And then there is missional fruit that is the natural fruit of abiding with Jesus. So the metaphor Jesus used is a vine and a branch. And he's like, I'm the vine, you are the branch. Abide in me and you will bear much fruit. I'm kind of as this past year, like many of people in the world, I've become very interested in wine. And I've had to pump the brakes on that. For the record, Eugene's one of my elders here. So I've pumped the brakes on that, just still qualified as an elder. But I've gotten really interested in wine. Renee and I both have. And a couple of years ago, we actually spent some time at a vineyard. And what's remarkable about how vines and branches work is that a branch that then produces these grapes, its only job, the only thing it has to do is stay connected. Like it literally has one job. You stay connected to the life-giving branch or to the life-giving vine, and then the branch will the life flow will go out of the vine into the branch, and then fruit will be produced. It's the only job. And we just stared at this. And then the fruit is wonderful. Jesus uses that exact same image, and he says, if you want to know how to produce fruit, and the fruit here that Jesus talks about is missional fruit, is people coming to know him, then you have one thing to do. You have to abide in me. So another way of thinking about it is this, is that in order to share the gospel effectively, you have to be a joyful recipient of the gospel. In order to communicate the love, grace of Jesus, what's required is that you actually be a participant continually of the gospel yourself, that you're experiencing fresh seasons of renewal and forgiveness and restoration yourself. So all of that is key, abiding in Christ. Because when it comes to sharing Jesus with neighbors, really it comes down to this. You just are talking to the person in front of you about the Jesus who's living inside of you. And so if Jesus is living and active inside of you, and if you're just talking about him, he's close to you. And then you're talking about him to the person who's just happens to be in front of you. All right, that's one. Two is this. There is an intentionality of becoming a friend of sinners. Your passage here is Luke 15. It's the famous story of the prodigal son, but the very beginning of it, where's my Bible? Here it is. The very beginning of it goes like this. Now, the tax collectors and sinners were all drawing near to hear him. And the Pharisees and scribes grumbled, saying, "This man receives sinners and eats with him." Jesus practiced this radical, he had this radical practice called table fellowship, where he would on purpose welcome people, draw people into his sphere, into his community, who were far from God, who were the sinners, the tax collectors, people who were moral outsiders. And he simply welcomed them into his sphere. And just doing that was radical. So now there's so much more to be said about this, but I encourage you to look at Luke 15 and to read that afresh. With an idea of what would it look like, especially in post-COVID world, to take table fellowship and to use that as a paradigm for bringing in people who are far from God, bringing them into your life. So this is hospitality. This is hosting parties. This is Renee actually is just now starting her second book club just for our immediate neighbors who aren't really connected socially with a lot of other folks. So it's kind of her way of doing this, of table fellowship. So that second thing, Jesus was a friend of sinners. How do I begin to welcome people into my table, into my daily rhythms, and into things that I actually enjoy doing? That's two. Third, honest conversations. So you're friend of sinners. You're welcoming people in. So there's what about the tension part? Like, what if they actually ask me what I believe? And what if it's about something that's really uncomfortable, like sexuality or, politics, pick a topic. What if, in other words, what if our relationship actually deepens to the level that we can talk about real things, then what? Well, John 4, and here's the passage. This is the story of Jesus with the woman at the well. What's fascinating about this story is that Jesus initiates this conversation with this woman who is a Samaritan woman. And then when the conversation gets at a certain level, Jesus doesn't permit her to have a religious conversation without getting into real nitty-gritty details. And Jesus, she was living with this guy who wasn't her husband, and Jesus kind of calls her out on it. And when you read the story, you actually discover that for her, Jesus having an honest depiction of her life, and the fact that the fruit of her life and the immorality of her life was causing pain and heartache. The fact that he acknowledged that, he called it out and acknowledged it, that was actually the turning point for her from becoming someone who was just can talk spiritual talk to someone who became a disciple of Jesus, and not just her, but nearly her entire village after her. So, but that comes down to the courage to have honest conversations. So that's 3. 4 is having eyes and awareness to seek out and to see people who are lost. The story here is Luke 19. This is a story of Jesus and Zacharias. He was a tax collector, and he was actually seeking out Jesus and climbed the sycamore tree. And what Jesus demonstrates in Luke 19 is an awareness to see people who might be interested in him. And Jesus calls him out, and then Jesus invites himself into Zacchaeus's house, and by virtue of that, into Zacchaeus's life. And at the end of that story, it says that salvation has come to this house. The principle, though, that I would like to highlight for us, though, is that Jesus had vision for opportunities for people who were lost, but maybe they were interested. And the fact that Zacchaeus had climbed the tree, he was actually seeking after Jesus, but Jesus had to notice him and then call him out. So here's the weird thing, and this is really what's radical, is that there are people right now in your life who, on the surface, would not be interested in church, Christianity, the Bible. Their lifestyle you might think, would prohibit them from being interested in that sort of thing. And yet, for reasons maybe they themselves could not give you, they find themselves climbing the sycamore tree and are actually a little bit interested, and maybe even are hoping that someone would call them out. So it's weird how this works, but but when you just have the awareness that Jesus had to call out someone who might actually be interested, even though it's in a paradoxical way, you actually see that people generally respond really positively. Having your eyes open to people who are kind of maybe outside the box, but who nevertheless might very well be interested in Jesus. That's Luke 19. Spend time in that. Yeah, that's 4. 5, this is just a word on the message of the gospel itself, which we'll get into more in depth next week. But Jesus called this message, he called it the gospel. And the image he provided for the message, and this is in Luke 8, he said the message is like a seed. And he has this beautiful, the parable of the sower and the seed, and how when you proclaim the gospel, you're like a sower, you're like a farmer, and you're sowing seed, and the seed that finds its way to good soil is the seed that grows. There's a lot to be said about the image that Jesus provides, but here's the one that I want to stick with you, that I really want to impress upon you, and that is that seeds are powerful in kind of a subtle way. Seeds, the way that they're made and designed, are actually designed in such a way as to carry within them the potential of immense growth and life. And yet, in seed form, that life is simply, it's latent, it's potential. And yet, once a seed is planted, once a seed is formed, it can actually stay dormant for a long time, and then it can, for when the environment is right, that seed can begin to grow. A few years ago, it was actually 2008, a scientist did an experiment on seeds, a seed that was discovered. It was actually discovered, and they dated it, and it was 2,000 years old. You can read about this in I think it's called Scientific American. And they were able to get the seed to grow. It was 2,000 years old and had never grown. But with the right environment, the seed grew. So I just want you to know that whenever you communicate Jesus in the gospel, Jesus says it's like sharing a seed. And sometimes the environment is right and that seed grows right away. Sometimes that seed is planted and it goes deep into a crevice in someone's soul, and it's just waiting there until the environment of that person's life is just right, and then it begins to grow. That's part of what we're called to be, is we're actually farmers. We're looking for good soil, but our confidence is actually in the seed itself, is in the message of the gospel. All right, that's 5. I can combine 6 and 7 really quickly. 6 is that the call, the impetus to communicate the gospel. It's clear that call is designed to be wide. It's for anyone, whosoever may. So that means that everyone is a candidate to hear the gospel. So no one falls outside of the realm of possibility for us. So as you're thinking about these people, the 5 people, whatever, everyone's a candidate. Jesus says, "Come and see," and he cast the nets out wide. So John 1:39 through 41. That's the passage to look at with that. There's a wide call. That's 6. And then 7, finally, there's also a high challenge. So Jesus actually front ends community. He says, "Come, be a part of my community. Come, have table fellowship with me." But that doesn't mean that at some point, Jesus doesn't turn around to those people who are in this table fellowship and he doesn't challenge the heck out of them. In fact, he does. So in Jesus's ministry, there is this tension between a wide call, throwing the nets to anyone who may come anyone wants to come may just check this on, try on these pair of glasses and see if they don't make better sense of the world. And at certain points in his ministry, to that same group of people, he challenges them. And he says things like this, and this is in Luke 9, where he says, as they were going along the road, someone said to him, I will follow you wherever you go. And Jesus said to him, foxes have holes, birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. To another, he said, follow me. But he said, Lord, let me first go and bury my father. And Jesus said to him, leave the dead to bury their dead. But as for you, you go and proclaim the kingdom. Yet another said, I will follow you, Lord, but let me first say farewell to those in my home. And Jesus said, no one who puts his hand to the plow and looks back is fit for the kingdom of God. In other words, there are times where that wide call, Jesus then meets that wide call with another message of, if anyone wants to follow me, he must pick up his cross, deny himself, and come after me. So that's the last principle. My hope is that these 7 principles of sharing the gospel that we learn from Jesus can help spark us and challenge us as we think about our neighbors. Now, I'm going to wrap us up here right now. But before I do that, are there any questions, thoughts, or clarifications that you would like before I wrap this up?
I have a statement, I guess.
Yes.
The 5 people that I want to rub salt into and become the light are members of my family, and they're very knowledgeable of God and Jesus, and they're Christian, and most are religious, some are not. But I guess when you say abide in Christ, I am praying that the Holy Spirit enter me so that I can speak with them in a way that they won't find it offensive or judgmental.
Mm-hmm.
That goes for probably everyone who I take this path with. But it's, I guess, the honest conversation that you mentioned, all of that, it's fear-provoking.
Yes. Yes, it is. And fear is one of the biggest barriers to having these conversations. Fear is one of the main reasons why that really prevent us from being the salt and light, because it's risky. It's who raise your hand if you love rejection.
Right.
Not many of us just really relish being ostracized. So I get that. And to me, though, the opportunity that comes along with thinking about abiding with Christ is that you actually have the very presence of Jesus in you, and he becomes a more active agent in that conversation. So it doesn't feel like you're talking with them, with your family members, about someone who's abstract. But you could even feel that his agency and even his words can come out of you as you're talking to them about you. And that's really powerful because it's so deeply connected to you. And rather than, giving a presentation about here are the things you need to believe about God, it's actually, no, I abide with Christ, and here's what I know about him and what my life looks like with him. And so that can help take some of the fear away. Although there is a measure of fear even with that.
So maybe if you have this huge fear, you just really abide in Christ and pray that
Yes.
all hearts are softened.
Yes. We'll get into this next week, but one of the key aspects of how mission happened in the early church was trust. Like literally, like just, okay, God, I'm going to trust you into this space, and I'm scared, but I'm just going to trust. I'm going to trust that you're going to give me the words to say. I'm going to trust that that the results of this isn't going to be utter disaster, and even if it is, I'm still going to trust you. But trust is part of what makes the way of Jesus unique. Is that we actually are stepping into difficult spaces and trusting God to give us the words to say when we need it.
Excellent.
Dave, can you just do the 7 things really quickly? Just recap what the 7 things are.
Yes. And if I was just a more responsible pastor, I would have an outline printed for you, but I don't. I just have it all handwritten, and that's kind of what I do. So here are the 7 things quickly. 1, abide in Jesus. That's John 15. 2, friend of sinners. That's Luke 15. 3, honest conversations. That's John 4. 4, seeking the lost. That's Luke 19. 5, the power of seeds. That's Luke 8, 4 through 15. 6, wide call. That's John 1, 39 through 41. And then 7, high challenge. That's Luke 9, 57 to 62.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that question. All right, guys. Okay, you have your assignments. Your assignment every night, I want you to pray for these 5 people. Talk to God about them, and increase your burden for them. And let's just see what God does. Let's just see what he does. So I look forward to seeing you guys next Monday, and we'll get into the Apostle Paul and what we can learn about how mission worked in the first century then. So I'm excited for that. If you have any questions about this class, or if you need further clarification, you can always reach out to me, Dave@fellowshipdenver.org, Dave@fellowshipdenver.org. All right, guys, have a great night. It's been great seeing you, and look forward to seeing you guys really soon.